Hi, my name's Kieran from the Advancement Book Club, and over the coming weeks, months and years, I'm going to be bringing you content around the books that we're talking about and authors of interesting non-fiction books. So we're going to start today with our first guest. We've got Giles Watkins, author of Positive Sleep. And I'm just going to get right into it, Giles. Great. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what made you want to write this book? What inspired you? What was your driver?
Thanks, Kieran. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. Really enjoying.
Thank you for being here.
Enjoying the process. I am a business person. I worked for 30 years for corporates. I worked for Shell International, McKinsey, Coates PLC in increasingly senior leadership roles. And during that period, I suffered from dramatic sleep problems for the last decade, if you like, of that 30-year period. And I had the opportunity to also, towards the end of that time, study a master's at INSEAD, the business school, in change management. And as part of that master's, I had to write a thesis about something I wanted to change in my life. And my sleep was something I wanted to change dramatically because it was absolutely terrible. So I studied the thesis, learned about my sleep, and began through that process to apply some of the techniques that I learned to myself, understand what my issue was, what my issues were, and help address them. And then a great friend of mine, Ben Renshaw, who's written about a dozen books, I was talking to him and he said, there's definitely a book in this. And I thought he was joking, went to see his editor and ended up publishing the book. So it was both a combination, if you like, of my personal journey and lived experience, and also a little bit of luck, if you like, as well.
So you talk about that you had sleep problems yourself. So obviously that's where the book came from. So when you talk about sleep problems, I mean, people obviously think about insomnia and things like that. How does that impact your day-to-day life? So what are the kind of day-to-day issues? I suppose I'm thinking during the day rather than. So how would that impact your life? I suppose. Yeah.
Well, with me there was a trigger. I was engaged to be married. I thought I was maybe going to be made redundant. My then fiancée thought actually I was going to be sacked. She didn't understand the process the company was going through. And I got very stressed about it, and that caused the trigger that gradually led me to sleep less and less and less every night, if you like. And as time went on, I got to the point where, well, firstly, I was exhausted all the time because I wasn't getting proper sleep, and I was waking up way too early and wanting to sleep earlier than I should. So it started to affect me in terms of not wanting to maybe go out in the evening, socialise, certainly affected my personal relationship, it affected my energy with my son, who was quite young at the time, so running around after a toddler wasn't really something I wanted to do. And also I found I was, in the daytime at work, I was trying to catch naps all the time. So I was fortunate, I was living overseas quite a lot, often had someone else that was driving. I would always be trying to find 20 minutes to snap in the back of the car or whatever. So I was constantly, a bit like, I suppose, a drug addict is always looking for the next fix. I was the person that was always looking for 20 minutes to grab a nap, especially in the afternoon. So it must have affected my cognitive ability as well, in terms of meetings I was in and so forth. So problems with sleep really affected me at night, because initially it would mean that I would want to go to sleep really early, sort of 8:30, 9 o'clock. And then would wake up at 3, and I had what's called maintenance insomnia, which is when you wake up and you can't get back to sleep, which is the most common form. And at 3 a.m. I was like this. I was, wide awake. And as a result, I mean, it affects you in all sorts of ways. I mean, it's not great for the person that you're sharing a bed with to start with. At 3 a.m, the upside is that you can get plenty of things done. So I actually started. In fact, I started working on my thesis all about my sleep issues at 3 a.m. The downside is that, you're quite often you want to go back to sleep at 4 or 5, and then if you go back to sleep, you'll be in the middle of a very deep sleep when the alarm goes off. A lot of people, again, talk about the fact they'll lie awake for ages and then they'll just be nodding off when it's time to get up. So I think there are actually upsides if you're getting up in the middle of the night to do stuff. But there are also more downsides, and you're not getting the depth or quantity of sleep that probably you need to be, to be healthy.
we know that a lot of people have sleep problems. Is there any research or information about how many people have sleep problems? And also, I mean, I guess you've already said, you know, if the sleep has a negative effect on your kind of day-to-day life, your work, your relationships, what kind of impact could we make, do you think, if there were fewer people with sleep problems or people had less of sleep problems?
Estimates vary massively as to how many people have sleep problems, right through from 15% at any one time in terms of adults, right through to, well, if I think in terms of my own rather anecdotal discussions, I would say 4 out of 5 people I talk to or adults have had sleep issues at some time. Okay, if you said to me, or you've said to me, if we could make that virtually zero, what would the effects would be? The first effect would be people would be much better at listening to each other. When you're tired, your ability to both interpret non-verbal cues and also your interest in what someone else is saying goes right down, because you're just trying to get through the day yourself. So communication and rapport and empathy and understanding of each other would increase massively from a business point of view and from a personal point of view, for example. I think also the ability to just show up as the best version of yourself. We all know when we've had a good night's sleep that we just feel that more, the appetite for the day in all its sort of manifestations is there. And when you're shattered, it's not there. So those are just a couple of examples of how things would improve. So it's quite significant. I think certainly from a very strict business point of view, productivity and just general profitability as well would be significantly increased. So there is a pretty massive multi-billion pound cost to poor sleep.
So a lot of this is focused around obviously the impact on business, the impact that a lack of sleep or poor sleep can have on businesses. How much of a person's kind of, I mean, this is their health you're talking about ultimately, how much of that is an employer's problem, or should it be an employer's problem? Or if you flip that round, I suppose, how much or what can an employer or a leader be doing to help their people perform at their best by getting
It's a great question.
Sleep?
How much of the sleep issue is an employer's problem? How much is more of an individual's challenge? I think I'm a great believer that it's both, and it should be people working in harmony between the employer and the employee. And there will be massive benefit for an employer in people sleeping better. So if a leader in a business or the leaders of the business can both promote better sleep and show that they care about it in terms of their timings of meetings as well, and how much they contact people out of hours and all those kind of behaviours, and even encouraging people to do walking telecons rather than sit around a desk if they're engaged in these, the multiple Zoom meetings that most of us are these days. Those are all examples of how companies in a way can start to promote good sleep and good health. But I do believe very much it is also an individual responsibility, and it's just about, for many people, it's as simple as prioritising. It's as simple as saying, actually, those 8 hours between 11 and 7 or 10 and 6 or whatever my sort of natural plus, if you like, constrained times for sleep are, because some people would prefer to sleep a bit later, but they have to get up for children or work or whatever. Just, ring fence those 8 hours and say, that's for sleep. What most of us do, and I'm as guilty in the past of that as anybody, is cut corners and think, well, that's something we can cut an hour off or 2 hours off, or it's not as important as it might be. And I found out to my cost how important it was. But certainly the individual has a massive role to play here.
And in terms of, it's kind of taking individual responsibility, and also we talk about responsibility of the company and a leader. You also talk in your book about physiological problems that come from a lack of sleep. So how much can doctors be doing, or healthcare services, or should we be going to the doctor with sleep problems, or is there something that they could be doing more proactively?
I'm glad you mentioned physiological issues with sleep, Kieran, because when I wrote the book, I did obviously a fair amount of research for that. And the first source I came across in terms of physiological problems relating to sleep listed 75 issues, that could in some way be linked to poor sleep. And I went to another source and that listed 85. Now I think there might have been slightly different characterizations, and clearly I'm not a medical doctor, but when I looked at the list, my summary was just about everything. So yes, there are most ailments that we're probably suffering from would improve through to poor sleep. Whenever we have the flu or we have some bug, most people say as part of what helped them get better was, well, I slept for a day or 2 days or whatever it happened to be. In terms of doctors, things have come a long way. And 15 years ago, I remember going to see a GP and asking about snoring and could they help, and they said it's not something we deal with. That was the conversation I had. Then maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I went and talked about poor sleep. The doctor told me he had it far worse than me. And then he gave me something that was both to help with my sleep, but also it was an antidepressant. And I knew that, or I knew enough about what he was giving me to know that it wasn't for me. And I literally put the prescription in the bin outside the surgery. So I think we've come a long way from then. We've now got things like certain types of cognitive behavioral therapy that are focused on insomnia, and I think doctors are more aware of that, although I think the training, I'm not sure current training for GPs, but certainly 10 or 20 years ago, I think sleep got about half an hour in the sort of 5 years of medical training or something like that. Really small amount. So I think there is more that's known of it, and there's more that can be done, and we are going in the right direction when it comes to doctors' approach to sleep. But I think the challenge for them is if they've only got 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is they've got to talk to you, it's going to be very limited. And really the conversation around sleep, generally you need to talk to someone about a bit more. You need to explore properly what their sleep issue is, and then to start think about what other things they can do. And many of those things are not maybe the things the doctor might classically talk to people about. There may be more sort of lifestyle things and so forth that are not as easy to write a prescription for, if you like. I think that may be part of the problem. So I think it's both probably the medical profession and also some of the alternative health and medical sources that can support people as well.
And on that kind of alternative, not even alternative medicine, but I'm thinking more about alternative lifestyle kind of choices. So we haven't really talked about this, but have you got any kind of tips or tricks for people who maybe are suffering from poor health? What's an easy thing that they can do that might have a positive impact?
One very straightforward thing is using magnesium supplements in some way, or finding ways to take magnesium in on a daily basis. Firstly, we need magnesium as humans. Secondly, we don't produce it in our bodies or naturally, so we have to take it in some way. You can take magnesium in through certain foods like broccoli, for example. You can take it in through a spray. You can take it in through having a Epsom salt bath or a magnesium flakes bath. There's different ways you can take it in, but it has an incredibly positive effect upon you in terms of both your sleep and also general relaxation and other health benefits, and yet we don't produce that. So most of us are probably magnesium deficient, and as far as I'm aware, you can't overdose on magnesium. So I just take a couple of tablets or a bit of powder in some water at night. But that's something that most people could do. It's a pot of magnesium that will last you 3 or 4 months, costs about £20, so it's not a huge investment, and yet there are, I think, only upsides to that. So that's one thing people can do. And I think another thing, as I've sort of alluded to before, is finding out, probably when you're on holiday or when you have a bit of a downtime, what your natural sleeping pattern is. And if it's sort of 10 till 7 or 12 till 6 or whatever it happens to be, hopefully a bit longer than 12 till 6, and then doing your best to keep to that pattern day in, day out, and I do mean at weekends.
So routine.
That element of a routine and prioritising it. As soon as people prioritise their sleep and prioritise a routine around it, and almost like a preparation for going to bed and a bit of time in the morning, as we've been discussing in terms as well of what you do with your early mornings and so forth. they're amazed by the results normally.
Let's talk about alcohol. I mean, a lot of people will have a drink before bed to help them sleep. So what are your thoughts on that? And also, I had a slightly silly, frivolous question, but I wonder actually how frivolous it is. Already, I can't turn up to work drunk. I can't drink and drive. Do you foresee a time when it would be illegal for me, or at least socially frowned upon, to drive whilst tired, or that I could be pulled over for that, or I would be sent home from work because I'm overtired? Could that happen?
Almost like a breathalyzer for being tired.
Yeah, could that happen? I don't know.
Okay, so let's. So there's two questions there. The first question is around alcohol and sleep and how it affects your sleep, really, and the second is around, could you envisage when almost tiredness or sleep or fatigue can be tested for, and that might stop you being able to drive or work and so forth? Take the first one, the sleep issue and alcohol. Essentially, alcohol is a sedative, so it will help you go to sleep, but it won't help you stay asleep necessarily. And sometimes the quality of your sleep will be affected. Also, if you've had a skinful, you'll need to get up and use the bathroom, and that'll wake you up anyway. But generally, it's a bit like a sleeping tablet in that regard, and it will help you get off to sleep, but it won't keep you asleep. So the general advice that you read, if you read some research around this, is the earlier you can have your alcohol, if you like, the better, which doesn't mean pouring claret on your cornflakes. It means if you have a drink at 6 or 7 p.m. and don't have much after that, you're likely to sleep a bit better and a bit deeper and a bit longer than if you're still having a scotch at midnight to help you go to bed. So this is the whole nightcap thing. There's some medical evidence that suggests it's not a great idea. Okay, so that's sort of that side. When it comes to, and this year I decided to only drink on 24 days a year. Okay, the rest of the year I wouldn't have alcohol. That's a personal thing around actually losing weight rather than the link between alcohol and sleep. But I have noticed my sleep has got even better as a result of that. And when I do have a glass of wine or two, I notice the difference. So I've sort of done a little bit of a experiment myself for other reasons, but that's what I've noticed. On the subject of the if you like, sort of almost like the breathalyzer for fatigue and tiredness, I think that if that was technologically possible, I can imagine it happening. And why do I say that? Well, for example, deaths that are supposedly linked to fatigue and people falling asleep on a wheel and so forth in America are now apparently higher than deaths linked to alcohol on the road. This is American road-based statistics. Okay, so whereas the alcohol and driving and drunk driving statistics and deaths have gone like that, the other ones have gone, as I understand it, in the other direction.
So you could argue then that really the government or somebody ought to be doing more about sleep.
Yeah, I think there's certainly grounds for that. A lot of that would then depend on how it's measured and what the technology is like and so forth. And we know that things like Fitbits and Oura Rings and so forth have got better and better and better over time. And so now they're probably reasonably accurate in measuring your sleep, for example. How accurate would they be in terms of measuring your overall fatigue and you going into some quite, I can imagine this could be quite a lively debate with unions and other bodies, and rightly so, around the state that someone's coming to work in. But I suppose athletes and footballers are wearing all sorts of things when they play the game, and they get pulled off depending on their state and so forth. So I suspect the technology is, if it's not there already, it's not far off. So yeah, I could imagine that. And I think what you're touching on, Kieran, is really interesting in terms of the future of sleep generally and how technology is going to interplay with that, because I think there will be significant developments, both in terms of someone's fitness for work or sport or whatever else it happens to be, but also in terms of how technology might interplay with helping us sleep better.
Do you think that could be something that's measured in the workplace as well? So I'm just thinking out loud, but at the end of the month, maybe I have a work review and I'm marked against how well I performed in XYZ. Do you think that employers might want to track sleep to have a measure of whether I'm performing at my best ability?
Yes, I think, and I understand that certainly in it's a question of, I think it's a question of measurability. I know that in Japan, for example, where they've had huge issues with the people even taking holidays. I mean, there's not that much holiday to take, as I understand it, for most Japanese companies, but and maybe only 3 weeks a year compared to what we normally take. But they have launched schemes to incentivize people to actually take time off and to be shown that they have taken time off and that they haven't accessed their work email and all these kind of things. Okay, and I can imagine something similar coming in for sleep, but for that to happen, the leaders of that organization or many organizations or the culture's got to start to shift so that people actually make the connections that we've been discussing about between performance and sleep. And it would be, I mean, I guess that's part of the dream of what I'd like to see come about, given the fact that most of what I do in terms of my sleep work is with business people and people in leadership roles.
Yeah, I think, did I see in the last few weeks, a Japanese company is paying employees quite a significant amount of money to take holidays?
That's right. That's right. That's certainly happened. And I know that also in certain European car companies, certainly in Germany, they had disconnected servers about 10 hours a day, I think it was, to make sure people were not sending emails or couldn't send emails in that time, and that was really came about due to the strength of the white collar unions saying if you want people to be on call 24/7, you've got to pay them to be on call 24/7. So I do think there's moves in the right direction like that, and I also think that actually, whilst COVID led to digital nomads, people working all over the world and so forth, and maybe wanting to work on slightly different hours, there was also another move that said, which I see more widely also locally, which is people saying, my health really matters, and a general boom in the wellness industry. So small and medium-sized businesses I know now have to have a wellness proposition. If they're recruiting, people say, well, also, do you encourage me to, have you got a gym membership, or can I go off and do a yoga class and all that sort of stuff? And people are actually interested in how their employer views their health in a way that 5 years ago, particularly in smaller businesses, people weren't talking about. So I actually think that the trend is in that direction. A lot will depend on probably enough people doing it and the measurability of it, and those two things are probably linked. Because if you can rely on the data, then people might start getting interested in it.
So, Giles, finally, I just want to ask, for you, Giles, the author, how have you found the process of writing this book? Have you learnt anything from it? And most importantly, what will the next book be?
Well, in terms of the process of writing the book, that began when I wrote the thesis when I was doing the Masters some years ago. In fact, sort of 2014, 2015, so quite a long time ago. And that whole process led me to understanding my sleep and that being able to sleep properly. So it was life-changing for me just going through that process. And then, as I think I mentioned earlier, I met an old colleague of a friend of mine who helped me then see the opportunity to write the book. Writing the book, I learnt a lot more because the thesis was very much about my personal experience and what I'd been able to do. So actually to write the book, I learnt more, especially around the science of sleep. And the next step for me actually is a second edition, because the book sold quite well. There's been a fair bit of interest in it. So the publisher came to me earlier this year and said, would you write a second edition? So literally over the next month, I shall be doing that. I shall be adding in a whole section around how COVID affected our sleep and our sleep habits, and also a bit touching on what we've talked about earlier, the future of sleep, how technology can hopefully help us sleep better, and how that may impact on in terms of professional cultures and other aspects between work and sleep as well. So I find that really interesting, really exciting, and I think the the focus on this subject will only increase.
Well, I've obviously read the first one. I look forward to reading the second one. And yeah, should we wrap it up? And thank you very much for joining us. It's been wonderful. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Kieran.